Government seems to be an inevitable outgrowth of human beings just sort of being together. Um, and no matter where you look, no matter where people are, you're going to end up finding some sort of government at play. And it can get super, super complicated, um, obviously. And it's the job of the government to facilitate the forward motion of a group of people. Um, and that's really it. That there's been every manner of government tried, and a lot of the time it wasn't, you know, a committee that formed all of these different governments. Actually, a committee would imply some sort of government already there. A lot of this stuff just sort of happened in the same way economies and trade just sort of happened. Governments just sort of happened because if you think about it, it's not enough to have one family somewhere existing. If you just have one family, there's not enough genetic diversity to continue with people. So uh, there needs to be more than one family. And that little unit, that little family unit, is the beginning of um, the most basic of governing structures. You sort of learn the laws and the sort of um, patterns that bring about health or the exact opposite of health within a family unit. And the people within the family unit over time, over years and years and years, uh, doesn't even really have to realize it. It's felt, you know, that there's so much experience and detail and so much events and words said and actions taken that it doesn't even need to be said. You feel it, that this unit of people is the innermost group, and um, at the same time you recognize that there are other families who consider themselves the innermost group, but you understand what's happening within your own family, and you realize that other families are doing very similar things. And it's almost like a gentleman's agreement, um, that yes, you are working on behalf of your family and I'm working on behalf of my own, but there's a lot of overlap. And in fact, us assisting each other has a much, 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 much higher probability of improving both of the lot of our families than us going straight up to war. Going to war, that option, in whatever form you might want to consider, like whether it's straight up physical battle or having an ongoing feud or an ongoing disagreement or an ongoing hostility towards another family, is going to consume so much of both of your effort so as to hold you back in other domains. And it literally holds you still. So if you have ongoing disputes with other families or other institutions that never seem to get resolved, or if you resolve one by one means or another and just go right to the next, if your overall attitude towards the world is hostility, you by default waste a shitload of energy, and it actually ends up bringing you more of what you don't want. It's a strange dynamic. People think that for whatever reason, hostility is a good strategy. It's not. And such people wonder, legitimately wonder, like spend time wondering why their life sucks, or even their families are disappointed in them, or years have gone by and they're actually set back further and further, and there doesn't seem to be any forward motion, it's because of the initial philosophy or understanding or comprehension of what's going on as a human being. And it's amazing what can actually be accomplished when you're on the other end of that. Because conflict is going to happen. It's actually an important part of what's going on. It is guaranteed to happen, and we all should know that. We should all, tuck that in our pockets and know that that's going to happen. But on the other end of it, if you have a non-hostile attitude towards other families, like if you understand that you have yours, they have theirs, and you're both after the same thing, remarkable cooperation can happen. And it's families and men and women of families who go out into the world and cooperate with other people who are literally at the tops of the world, who are in all of the positions that are fruits of cooperation. And that is what we're doing here as people. We're cooperating. And you're going to run into people who, you can tell pretty quick whether or not they're people who even want to participate in such a thing. And there are such vast benefits. I can't even tell you, there's more than I can actually even say right here, because it's every day, it's thought after thought. It's when certain things come up, you think of certain people and you go to them with certain things. And it's, like I said, it's every day, And this is how governments start to come into form, because you can have a situation where there's a collection of families or a collection of people who cooperate, and then one who sees this and wonders why they're not part of this cooperation, and takes that hostility to another level and turns it into more of an active hostility. And you got to imagine, in times pre-government, or even pre-business, pre-law, where such grievances are murderous. Sure, of course, absolutely. And a person will and can do anything in that situation to get some of their honor back, or get some of their dignity back in the eyes of everybody involved. And, when you don't have the ability to cooperate, you fall back on might, which is a very common thing, very, very common for just about anybody, anywhere, at any time. When you are unable to cooperate, and cooperation takes intelligence, it takes a certain amount of understanding. It takes, it takes certain things that eventually bring you up and take you up with such momentum that those things start to become easy. But before it's easy, it's not. And if you never get to that point to where it's easy, you might fall back on might. And it's like I say all the time, if you're somebody or an institution or a place or a country that has to rely on might all the time, you will exhaust yourself and eventually fail, because you're not cooperating with anyone. And everybody can see that, But governments start to form when you have people who cooperate and people who don't cooperate, and you start to form laws, and you start to form institutions that take care of these things. Before people lay down and set up a spot to claim as home for a village, before there are property lines, there are handshakes, agreements, and understandings. There are people who cooperate and people who don't. And to get it to a point to where you have property lines on paper, legally binding, it's to have another objective party able to intervene with any dispute. And this starts to expand into all manner of human cooperation and hostility. And even in the most advanced civilizations, even the ones with a law for everything, hundreds of years have gone by, so much has been considered, there's always more being added because there's new things coming. Even in that situation, you have the continuation of people who cooperate, people who don't. You're never going to get rid of that. Like, you're never going to, vote or legalize or criminalize that circumstance out of existence. That's the fundamental human circumstance that all of this is meant to, let's say, make the best for all parties involved, as fairly as possible, because if it's too unfair for too long, people will take out their weapons and go to whoever's in charge and take them out of power. That has happened so many times. It's a normal thing in human history. So if you're in a situation where centuries are passing, decades are passing, and there's stability and there's no revolutions, it means, on the whole, the population likes what's happening. And there's going to be, criticisms all over the place. Of course, there always will be, and there always should be. But some places aren't in need of revolution, and some places are. And for us, we choose our leaders, but there's obviously been many systems that did not involve that. But we have come up with some pretty elaborate ways of getting people in power. And sometimes for us, in the past, there's been a situation where the person who took it was the one who was most qualified because they took it. And what it took to take it was difficult enough that your intelligence and your desire to lead is implied in the fact that you took it. And in time, we had to figure out a system that made that undesirable to even the population. As civilizations go and governments get better and better, it's almost like the consciousness or the very awareness of the population raises at the same time. Because here in the United States, the idea of somebody by force taking the government and then all of us just accepting that and being like, yes, they totally deserve that, is completely absurd. Like, nobody would be like, yeah, that's legitimate, But there was a time where that was exactly how it went. And after it was taken, that person was viewed as so legitimate that their succeeding family members were adequate to lead. Their lineage, their blood, their very DNA was fit to lead. And not only that, there are divine elements, especially when you're talking about a king. And there are still many places in the world who totally operate that way. And when you talk about quote-unquote westernizing, you're talking about generally lifting the consciousness of people in an area to understand that they can choose their leaders. Like, that's possible. Like, it's not just to the one who takes it that should be there. Because it's just a lower level of organizing. But it was a form for a long time. And there's a constant ongoing relationship between the government and the people. That there's almost like a consent in a way. And in a place like the U.S., it's highly, even though it doesn't seem like it sometimes, it's highly responsive to the people. If the people weren't, how does one say this? If the people weren't worthy, then they wouldn't be led in the way that we are. That's to say that there is enough educated, wise, intelligent people in the United States to listen to take seriously, so as to import what they're saying and apply it in policy. And the fact that the United States population is armed to the teeth adds legitimacy to the sovereignty of the people of the United States. It was a horrible mistake for the Western countries of Earth to disarm themselves. I always say it was a catastrophic failure in understanding what human beings are. It was a failure in understanding what we're even doing here. To think that you could just disarm yourself as a population and all would be hunky-dory. Like to think that you've... to think that you can have that sort of relationship with the government, which again is people, is a failure in understanding what's happening. Because it's not just people, it's a certain sort of people. And it's also a collection of the people that came before. And those people have written down what they've done, and it's legally binding. And in some places, I see a deviation in what the people of that territory want and what is actually done by the government. It seems like in some places the government actively dislikes what their country is and who populates it, and thinks it should be something different. Like actively. And that is not long for this world. That's not going to last very long. People think, like places like Europe are so well established that it's static, that great and quick and sudden things can't happen. But that's absolutely not true. That when people talk about illusions or constructs, that's one of them. It's one of those failures to understand what people are. And you can't keep acting against the interests of the people in your territory and expect them to roll along with it. It's like I said, there are people who cooperate and there are people who don't. And if you elect people who do not want to cooperate with the general consensus, you're going to have a problem. You're just going to have a problem. Like, you elect governments, and you can get used to governments not cooperating with you and actively going against you, but that's the exact opposite purpose of what a government even exists for. A government doesn't exist to not cooperate. Government exists as an entity of cooperation, of cohesion among a collection of people over an extended period of time that ideally makes cooperation easier and easier. So much so that you can kind of look at the government as benevolent in a way. But even that isn't a secure interpretation. It's one of many, but it shouldn't be the only one because, like I said, a government is people. And it's possible for every layer of government that's unlocked, you open up a further door in human possibility. It shouldn't be understated how important the government is for what happens in that territory. You have the government as an outgrowth of human organizing, as well as business. Business is an outgrowth of human organizing. A business is a center of gravity that makes and distributes and organizes. And you need government and business cooperating, not in cahoots, not going to each other to advance each other as entities. You need them cooperating. The wheels between those two things need to be greased all the time in a way that is in line with law. Business should be free, but not too free. You know, there are, in my mind, there's a sort of golden ratio where business isn't completely 100% wide open and free, because that makes it to where businesses are too powerful over their employees and over the consumer base. But you can't over-regulate them, because that takes away the whole point of their existence over time. It erodes it. There's somewhere in between that is in between wide open freedom and oppressive regulation. There is some spot that is maximum health between business and government, where a business essentially feels free to create and do and make as much money as it needs to make, and have a healthy relationship with its employees and the consumer base, and at the same time having a legal framework that aids that health, that is not a hostile force, but a cooperating entity. And those two things cooperate to work well with the population, because while all this is going on, while there's a cooperation between business and government, the lifeblood of those two things is human beings. Because as this is going on, you're having people flow in and out of government and flow in and out of business in a circular type thing. And almost everybody who is governed is either involved with a business or a government. You know, those two things are forces, and they are, you could call, opposing forces, but they need to be in cooperation. And there's periods of time where that cooperation involves regulation. It's like a human body is regulated. We're not just anywhere and everywhere all at once. There are certain things about the human body that are regulated, it would seem, and governed, and well-placed and intentional. And when all of these things in the human body are operating and getting what it needs adequately in terms of food and psychological stimulation, knowledge, wisdom, oxygen, you have health. But those things are needed. You cannot go without those things. And we're not so free that we might just jump up into the air and just completely leave the planet. We are bound here. We're not so fast that we might just run 100 miles an hour or 200 miles an hour. We have limits. We can only eat so much, and we can only do so much in a day. But that forms a much larger picture. That means we need other things and we need other people. And government and business are at their best when they have found that golden ratio, when government or people in government or who are government-minded don't look at business as an enemy, and vice versa. But even within that, you're going to have a broad range of people, some who do view business that way and some who don't. And it's those people who are going to argue about what you should do. But to say something like, we need to get rid of billionaires, is like a fourth grader discussing business and politics. That is a childlike view that should be viewed as such, because no, we shouldn't get rid of billionaires. That's insane. That's somebody who views the private sector as a place where just about anybody can become powerful. And a government-minded person doesn't like that. They don't like the idea that anybody can just become powerful through business. Such a person has an interpretation that's always hostile to business. It says they're exploitative and oppressive and they don't give anything and they evade taxes and they're just evil. That's wrong. It's completely dead wrong. And if you go on that way and things always seem to be a certain way for you, you need not wonder why. You can't just be hostile to things that aren't always hostile to you or to anyone. It's perfectly fine that there's billionaires. In fact, there should be trillionaires one day. I want the United States growing as powerful as it possibly can for as many people as it possibly can. And at the same time, those hypothetical trillionaires, I would want them to be the sort of people who also want to cooperate. Who, yes, are profit-driven, but they also have other competing motives that get awfully close to profit, but not quite fully there. Because profiting is what keeps you even in existence. But maybe you also like the country. Maybe you also like the people here. Maybe you also have some interest in seeing this place get better and better. And maybe that's somewhere in your mind, and you dictate yourself according to that. Maybe. Because it's like I said, that there are levels of government and business and just general human being that unlock further and further levels. And the degree to which we can cooperate, full cooperation, is a very high trust society, but it makes the society naive to the rest of the outside world. So you have to have some amount of lack of cooperation to sort of keep you on the ground, I guess you could say. And it's always going to be that way. There's always going to be people who just don't want to cooperate. They're just rebellious people, and that's how they are. And that's fine. That's okay. But there are as well giant phases in and out in a society that lasts for a long time, where trust goes down and trust goes back up, and and within us, within our current society, there's so many new things happening. And not only is there so many new things happening, we're keeping track of so many different things that we didn't even know we could keep track of in the past. Like, we're able to keep track of such small and minute economic details and political details that we're able to become finer and finer and better at managing such a colossal entity as the United States, and do it fairly easily, to be honest. So much so we can argue about very stupid things and frame things in a very stupid way and not get much blowback because of it. It's like we have it so good that we can actually be pretty dumb and be just fine. It's like there's more and more fat to sort of revel in. We don't need to be all that lean because things have gotten so large. But it can't be like that forever. It's like I said, there's an ebb and flow. And if you really want to reach the higher stratas, even as an individual, then it's better to have a state of mind that likes the idea of other people doing better and being well and being all right and cooperating with people. And such a thing should never be forced or never have to be forced. It's a thing a person realizes at a young age. You play on sports. That's why people like their kids playing sports or or video games or doing something with other people, because it's about at that point in time you start to see this, because in those endeavors you not only cooperate in those specific things, but you form these bonds too that have other benefits that feel a certain way outside of the sport or the game. You make friends. You make lifelong friends by cooperating. And some of the most forgettable people are people who just can't cooperate. And it's those people who know that who think I can never be accepted, I can never actually get anybody to cooperate, therefore I hate them, I don't like them, and I'm going to harbor this, and it's going to keep on building. But I can promise you, within that person, there's something going on that can be identified as a large reason why cooperation is never achieved. Or if it is achieved, it's not achieved by the people that this person wants to be spending their time with. And in an ever-advancing society where more and more is on display for all to see, these things get compounded. Cooperation is seen by more people than just the group. And failure is seen by more people than just the people involved. It sort of expands and it spreads by virtue of recording it and putting it on the internet, which is, like I said, a whole nother level of keeping and holding and storing information. Social media and the internet is effectively a large database of stored information and experiences that anybody can kind of watch, and it does influence us all. I mean, there was a time where a lot of what was happening was limited to a relatively local area, unless it was so exceptional that it got in the newspaper and spread and, expanded further and further. But now, it's the exact opposite, but it's not necessarily good or bad. With all things that change, there are pros and cons. It's very difficult to sell something as only good or only bad sometimes, because it's going to come with both. It depends on what it is. Some things can be sold as extremely, extremely good. It depends on the quality and nature of the thing. But even within something like that, something so good and something so advantageous is going to involve changes in other areas. And it just depends on how you view those things that change. If you fall in love with somebody and you plan on getting married one day, that's a very good thing, but it's going to involve a lot of change as a consequence. Things don't just come along as without change in multiple directions. And governments are no different. And we've actually come quite a long way. And it's to a point now where international politics is such an easy thing to follow. There's a story for every territory that is ongoing. And if you pay attention, it's pretty easy to see the overall flow of the globe. And wouldn't it be a strange thing if we had a different system, for choosing our leaders? What if we picked 4 or 5 presidents all at once, and they were all of different age ranges, and we designed it to where you were always president between ages 50 and 60, so you picked one who was 20, one was 30, one was 40, and one was 50, and you didn't have to think about it for 40 years. You already picked all 4 of them. It's like we don't know the full breadth and scope of how governments will continue to form and shape. Some call this the age of state, where the concept of state will continue to bloom and grow. But when that was declared, I don't think such things as AI were on the horizon, which is going to be a potent force. And that's going to play a large role. I mean, that's such a big force that it fits itself within the large hemispheres of business and government, and the universal flow of people in between both. I mean, some of the ways that is going to change business is pretty wild, you know. Significantly amplifying everybody's abilities to organize, to take information and turn it into this thin line of cohesive and interesting material, presentable material. But the government should, of course, always enact the will of the people, but sometimes in its own way. Sometimes it has to know that the will of the people is well intended, and it has to make moves that satiate that will, but don't appear as that in real time. Because sometimes the government has information that the people don't have, and it has to act on that too. And there's a natural inclination to not want to trust government, which is completely understandable. But in certain places, if the government ends up seeing itself as non-adversarial, and the people ends up seeing the government as non-adversarial, as well as business, and there is a genuine cooperation, it completely changes the way you regulate, and it completely changes the way everything is viewed. I mean, doesn't that sound like the utopian scenario where the people of a territory do choose their leaders, but there's a level of cooperation and trust, not only among the people, but among the various institutions that is very strong? Like, does that not sound like exactly what we should be trying to get to? And you don't do that by lying. Because the truth carves a deep trench into reality, and that trench has features, visible features, and evidence of what has happened. And if you're speaking the truth, you automatically have that on your side. And if you're lying, you don't. And while you're lying, there's this giant trench that's been etched into time, these events that have overwhelming visible evidence of what happened, and you're saying the opposite. It's only a matter of time until all of this is uncovered, and it becomes known that you're sort of operating with hostility against the truth itself, which is a very poor position to put yourself in. Why put yourself there? Why not just get beautiful and poetic with the truth? Why not just say the truth in a certain way that makes it easier to digest and makes it to where we can trust you, so that there's a more and deeper sense of cooperation among you and us? Because if you're telling the truth, that's the best place to start. There's not a setback there unless you're so wholly incompetent that the truth of what you've done is so bad because you're so terrible at this, then you shouldn't even be there in the first place. Like, not all people are meant to lead. And if you actively seek a position in leadership, you shouldn't lie, and you shouldn't be completely incompetent. And if there's some other reason that somebody ends up in power, there's some other reason that you're doing this, then it'll eventually be known. And I would ask who you're working for in that case, because if you're wholly incompetent, then you're not working for the people who elected you. That's for damn sure. Because you're unable to do anything that they need and want. And if you're lying, I would ask the same question. Who do you operate for? Yeah, and I would think it's safe to assume that there's plenty of people in the United States that are not acting on behalf of the people of the United States, because in order to get something done in your area of the world, then you need somebody here operating on your behalf. Because the United States has so much sway. And I get that. But the situation is indeed the United States and America before all else. For the people we put there, and the intentions of those people should be that. And if we can help somewhere in the world, of course, we should do that as well. But that comes second or third or even fourth. And even on that list of countries, we have people and nations that we favor for our own interests. And that's something that I will never be able to stress enough. If you're even in business, it matters very much who's running your business. It matters who you hire. All of it matters. And some people are meant to sweep floors, and some people are meant to run the whole ship. And the CEO, if he's sweeping floors, he's not going to be doing that forever. He simply won't be content with that. He's going to see things and notice things that are for the benefit of that institution, and he won't be able to help but move beyond sweeping floors. But some people literally want to sweep floors, but just want to be compensated properly for filling that role, and be treated properly for filling that role. You should always shake the hand of the janitor and look him in the eye and appreciate them. Always. Everybody, from top to bottom. They all should be treated and rewarded for their cooperation. And you shouldn't just think that you can replace anybody with anybody. It might be true, but it unlocks a deeper level and a higher level for us people if you can manage to get past that view that people are expendable, as if each person is their own little universe, because they are.